This week was really tough for the Bolsonaro supporters. This week was a hard week for them, right? Because like last week, the Bolsonaro supporters had two victories, right? The far right along with the Centro, right? Led notably by Flavio Bolsonaro and Davi Alcolumbre himself, the president of the Federal Senate. The federal government and Brazil, in my view, suffered two defeats. The first defeat was the overturning of Lula's veto. Lula had his veto of the sentencing bill overturned by the federal Senate. As part of a plan worked out specifically with Davi Alcolumbre, senator and president of the federal Senate, and Flavio Bolsonaro, they overturned Lula's veto on the sentencing bill. And now what's missing? What's missing is the promulgation of the law and its publication in the official Gazette of the Union. Lula won't sign it into law. I don't think he'll sign it into law, especially since he vetoed the entire text, so he won't sign it. So it's up to the president of the National Congress, Davi Alcolumbre, to promulgate the law. He should promulgate the law. The deadline is 15 days extendable for another 15 days and publish it in the official Gazette of the Union, this law. In this way, the coup plotters will have the right to a reduction of their sentences. They will have the right to have their sentences reduced. Obviously, this is not automatic. It's not automatic. All those who want to have this benefit of sentence reduction will have to file a petition with Justice Alexandre de Moraes' chambers, requesting the reduction of their sentence. And I told you that from now on, everything is in the hands of the Federal Supreme Court, whether the law is applied or not. Why do I say that? Because alongside these petitions, which can only be analyzed after the law is published, the law needs to be promulgated by the President of the National Congress, Davi Alcolumbre, and published in the official Gazette of the Union. Only then everyone who wants to can file a petition. They file a petition with Justice Alexandre de Moraes requesting a reduction of their sentence. During this period, as soon as the law is promulgated and published, there will already be direct actions of unconstitutionality, which will be filed with the Federal Supreme Court to analyze whether the sentencing law is constitutional or not, and to determine the scope of this law. With that, the Federal Supreme Court can suspend all petitions requesting sentence reductions until the final analysis of this direct action of unconstitutionality, which is already being organized by PT, PSOL, and REDE. Do you understand? Even the Prosecutor General of the Republic herself can file this action. And the point is to suspend all requests for sentence reduction until the final analysis of this direct action of unconstitutionality, in which the Supreme Court will analyze whether the sentencing calculation law is constitutional or not. That should be the way. Obviously, the suspension of all sentence reductions will depend especially on the justice assigned to the case. It will depend on which justice it is assigned to and which justice's chambers this direct action of unconstitutionality ends up in, which will analyze whether the sentencing calculation law is valid. Whether it is valid or not. It will depend a lot on which justice is assigned. Obviously, if it's someone like Andre Mendonça, Nunes Marquez, or Luis Fuchs, then he won't suspend the petitions for sentence reductions under the sentencing calculation law. Now, if it's other justices like Alexandre de Moraes, Flavio Dino himself, and others, I believe they will suspend all requests for sentence reduction until the final analysis of the direct action of unconstitutionality, which could take a while. So to sum up, everything is in the hands of the Federal Supreme Court, but politically we have to understand. It was a victory. Whose? The coup plotters. Bolsonaro supporters. What happened? There was a union between the Centro, the right, and the far right there in the National Congress. During the National Congress session that overturned Lula's veto on the sentencing calculation bill. And according to the information, this union happened exactly so that through a big mutual protection agreement, especially regarding the investigations into Banco Master, They even said that Davi Alcolumbre asked Lula for protection regarding the investigations into Banco Master. And that Lula said everyone will take responsibility for their own actions. Everyone is on their own. Whoever did something wrong will be held accountable. And that's why Davi Alcolumbre put the veto up for a vote and worked and negotiated to overturn Lula's veto. And not only that, the government's second defeat last week. And it was exactly for the first time in more than 100 years there was a rejection of a federal Supreme Court justice nominated by Lula. The federal Senate rejected Jorge Macias, nominated by Lula as a federal Supreme Court justice, to fill the vacancy left by Luis Barroso, who retired. It had been more than 100 years since there was a refusal and a rejection of a federal Supreme Court justice nomination by the President of the Republic. And the federal Senate simply did not approve Jorge Macias. So, according to the information, it was because Lula did not agree to establish any kind of shielding or protection for anyone regarding this whole Banco Master situation. And according to O Globo, the person who went directly to Lula to ask for protection was exactly the president of the National Congress, who is also the president of the Senate, Davi Alcolumbre, that he and only he could decide whether to move forward or not. To an override of a veto, as well as to a denial or approval, which wasn't the case, to a rejection of the federal Supreme Court nominee. So the government suffered two major defeats last week. And according to Globo itself, was it because Lula didn't want to get involved in the scheme to interfere with the federal police? To try to protect people involved with Banco Master, in the master pocket, in the biggest banking fraud in Brazil, maybe even in the world, which could exceed 100 billion reais. Continuing this week, there were two situations that are connected to what happened last week. There's no way around it. The first situation is that Lula was invited and went to the United States. And I took a look at the Bolsonaro supporters' information bubble. Guys, I was scared with so many lies. And I kept thinking, how can there be people who believe in this kind of lie? Gustavo Gayer himself. He said that Lula was summoned, that Lula went to the United States. He wasn't invited. He was summoned by Donald Trump, that Donald Trump would put him in his place and humiliate him, that he was going to destroy him, and that Lula really didn't want to go, but Lula had to go. And he said, Donald Trump is going to humiliate him. Donald Trump is going to destroy him. And where did that happen? On the contrary, Donald Trump said that Lula is a good man. He is a very intelligent man. In several situations. Who said that? Gustavo Gayer in his video. With thousands and thousands of views. Then comes that guy over in the United States. What's his name again? Paulo Figueiredo. So Paulo Figueiredo also does live streams. He makes videos. And he says that Lula only went there because of Joyce Batista, the great Brazilian businessman who has many businesses in the United States, who asked Trump to meet with Lula. But they don't even coordinate their statements. Why? Because he also mentioned Joyce Batista. But he said exactly the opposite. Lula was very angry because meat in the United States is very expensive. The American people are not eating meat anymore. Soon Americans will be doing like Argentinians, eating donkey meat. Are there donkeys there? I don't know. And cat, because in Argentina, the people there, the crisis is so serious, so intense that people are eating donkey meat because there are a lot of donkeys there, and cat meat. Soon in the United States, for Americans to eat meat, they'll have to eat deer. There are a lot of those deer there. It's really the deer. That's what they're called. The ones you see in those animated movies. Yeah, soon they'll be eating deer. Because it's serious. Meat is really expensive there. Then Gayer said it's because Lula is really mad at Joesi Batista because meat is really expensive there. And Josie Batista is one of the main people who sells meat to the United States. So, yeah. And that's why Lula is finished. That's why Donald Trump is going to end Lula. Then the other one. Paulo Figueiredo already said the opposite. He already said that Joesi Batista is a friend of Lula. A friend of Lula. And that Joesi Batista even donated millions of dollars to Donald Trump's campaign. And Joesi Batista asked, so that Donald Trump would want to receive Lula. That's why Lula was being received. So that's how it was. These lies are ridiculous. Do you know what they're saying now? After Lula was welcomed on the red carpet at the airport, and then he was welcomed on the red carpet by Donald Trash. I showed you yesterday. And that Donald Trump made a post. He says Lula is very smart, he's a good man, and that the conversation was very good, and so on. They had lunch together there, they ate together, and do you know what they're saying? That all of that was done with artificial intelligence. That everything, those movies there, those videos, it's all a lie, all made with artificial intelligence. I'm going to tell you something. These people really, look. And the worst part isn't even that. The worst part is realizing that there are congressmen, there are senators who know that all of this is a lie. But they deal in this kind of lie, this kind of speculation, this kind of conspiracy theory to manipulate and deceive those who are already mentally disturbed. Because they know that Lula met Donald Trump. They know that Lula was invited. They know that Donald Trump respects Lula and knows that Lula is one of the statesmen who knows best how to talk, negotiate, and have a dialogue. It's Lula. So here's the thing. They're crazy with envy and shame at the same time. And there are so many lies that it scares me. Especially when I see comments from people who believe those lies. It's a horrible thing, guys. This Bolsonarism is a disease. It's a cult. I rebuke it in Jesus' name. Get out, devil. Back off, devil, because for God's sake, people, I'm going to tell you something. It's really sad to see how many Brazilians are being deceived and believe in this craziness. Some congressmen and senators still spread it. Right, Gaia? What a shame. So it's like this, a big defeat for the far right. This situation and Lula's maneuvering. He did what had to be done. He is the president of Brazil. He was the one who was invited and he had to go. The United States is Brazil's second largest trading partner, only behind China. So he really did have to go and seek what is best for Brazil with alliances, with business, with contracts and everything else, but always bringing what is best for Brazil. So Lula went and I said he was going to shine and Lula did shine, as always. The rest, folks, is envy, bravado, desperation, and really a lot of lies. What a horrible thing. Congressman Leonel Radio said a little something about this situation here. Take a look. The jig is up, right? Flavio Bolsonaro's dream running mate apparently is out. Who was it exactly? Ciro Nogueira from the PP to be his running mate. Yeah. Look at what Congressman Leonel Radio said here. Let's see what he said. It's always very important and necessary.
And in the end, the 300,000 Reis allowance wasn't for Lula's son. It was for Ciro Nogueira, former chief of staff in Bolsonaro's government, the most important position in Bolsonaro's government, and also the dream running mate of Flavio Bolsonaro. Flavio Bolsonaro said that Ciro Nogueira would be his vice president in this year's elections. And then in the end, he received 300 to 500,000 Reis per month from Borcaro, among others, some other little deals too, including trips with daily allowances of 130,000 reais paid by Borcaro, real estate deals. Anyway, totally involved with the Banco master scandal, which simply demolished the Brazilian financial system. And he even introduced a proposed constitutional amendment at Bolsonaro's request. This constitutional amendment bill aimed to make Brazil more flexible and vulnerable. And the connection between the central bank and the federal government, who is it that supports this again? The Bolsonaro family. And who was the biggest financier of Bolsonaro's 2022 campaign? Bolsonaro. 3 million reais and another 2 million reais for Tarcísio de Freitas now. Everything is coming to light, including payments to politicians, and all of them are far-right Bolsonaro supporters. And knock, 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 knock. The federal police, they went to Ciro Nogueira's house and seized items there. Luxury car, motorcycle, more information. And this is just the beginning. The Bolsonaro family and the far right have both hands all over this scheme. And that's why they want so badly to remove President Lula, who is cleaning up Brazil. We've resisted until now. Now it's time to defeat fascism. No one does anything alone. Until victory, always.
Then many of you came to ask me, Andrea, but Senator Ciro Nogueira has parliamentary immunity. Can he be arrested? Yes, he can. Parliamentary immunity makes arrest a bit more difficult, obviously. Parliamentary immunity is described in Article 53 of the Constitution, and it says the following, that deputies and senators can only be arrested in the act of committing a non-bailable offense. So if he's caught in the act, he can only be arrested for a non-bailable crime. But there's a catch. By court order, he can be arrested for any crime. If there's a court order in this Bolsomaster case, who does that court order have to come from? Andrea Mendonca. If there's a court order from Andrea Goncalves for the arrest of Senator Ciro Nogueira, he will be arrested. Will he, Andrea? He will. But there's a catch. That same parliamentary immunity says the following. It says that the chamber the lawmaker belongs to can overturn the arrest of that parliamentarian. In other words, if Ciro Nogueira is arrested, the Federal Senate in a plenary session can rule on this matter and overturn the senator's arrest. This is also part of parliamentary immunity. In other words, for a senator or a federal deputy to actually be imprisoned, the body of evidence has to be very strong. Otherwise, the House overturns it. Now, of course, we've already seen situations where the body of evidence is very strong against the parliamentarian, and even so, the House decides to release the criminal. And I don't doubt that this case is one of those. Why, Andrea Gonçalves, more people are involved. Very possibly there are more senators and people from political groups involved in the Bolsonaro fraud. And one will try to cover up for the other. What do I mean by that? That I believe Ciro Nogueira will be arrested. But he will only be arrested after the federal police thoroughly investigate all this evidence, all the documents, cell phones, and computers they seized yesterday. And really to find even more evidence on top of everything the federal police has already found on Bolsonaro's cell phones, which directly implicates Ciro Nogueira in all this fraud. It states there that Ciro Nogueira received a monthly payment of 300 to 500,000 to participate and help Banco Master and Daniel Bolsonaro in all the fraud that harmed thousands of people. And it's interesting, isn't it? The Bolsonaro supporters used to say that the one who received a monthly payment of 300,000 was Lula's son, Lulinha. And now, apparently, according to the evidence being gathered by the federal police, the one who was receiving monthly payments was Senator Ciro Nogueira, from 300 to 500,000 reais per month. The world doesn't just turn right, guys. The world flips over. And look, it was a Bolsonarist minister who authorized all these operations. Why? Because the evidence is undeniable. The evidence is substantial. It's really serious. Otherwise, Andre Mendonça wouldn't have authorized it. No, he wouldn't. So I believe Ciro Nogueira will be arrested in such a way that the Senate doesn't overturn the arrest. Did you understand? Now, you know what happened in Rio de Janeiro, right? The lawmaker, Thiago Rangel. Thiago Rangel Central? I know it's Rangel. He was arrested, state rep from Rio de Janeiro. Connected there with Rodrigo Bacelar, who was arrested. All connected there to the same political group as the governor, the former governor of Rio de Janeiro, Claudio Castro, who is part of the same political group as Flavio Bolsonaro. He was arrested, and the suspicion is, among other things, stealing education funds. Right? They're from Claudio Castro. He was arrested. Then the Legislative Assembly tried to get him out of jail. Within this area of parliamentary immunity that I explained to you, Alexandre de Moraes did not accept it. Alexandre de Moraes said he won't release him. Wait, Andre, but you just said that the Constitution says he can be released? Yeah, but Alexandre de Moraes had a different interpretation. That he can be released when the congressman, or in this case, the senator, is arrested for circumstances related to his parliamentary activities, the ones he carries out, and not for crimes unrelated to parliamentary activities. Then Alexandre de Moraes also stated that this has to be analyzed by the Federal Supreme Court, that not every situation will allow the legislative branch to overturn a decision to arrest a politician. Of a congressman or a senator, it's not in every case, and the Supreme Court has to analyze this situation. This decision by Alexandre de Moraes is valid. And I think it's Tiago Rangel, he won't be released. The Legislative Assembly won't release Tiago Rangel. And the first panel has already confirmed Justice Alexandre de Moraes' decision. And soon this situation will be addressed by the full court. What is the scope of parliamentary immunity in these situations of ordering imprisonment? What are the cases in which the National Congress or the Legislative Assembly can lift the detention ordered by the judiciary against a politician? In which circumstances, all circumstances, he keeps messing up and will still be released? That made me think of Chiquinho Brazão. Do you remember him? Chiquinho Brazão was sentenced to 78 years in prison. Was it 78 or 58? I don't remember. I think it was 78 years. The killer got 90 years in prison. The killer, Rony Lessa, got 90 years in prison. And Chiquinho Brazão, Domingos Brazão, and Rivaldo Barbosa were convicted. I don't remember if it was 58 or 78 years. I can't recall right now, but it was around that. What office did Chiquinho Brazão hold? He was a federal deputy. Then the Federal Supreme Court ordered the arrest of all three. Then it went to the Chamber of Deputies for review to see if they would keep Chiquinho Brazão in jail or release him. Do you remember that? Do you remember? I remember well because I followed it here and explained it to you. What did Flávio Bolsonaro do? Not Flávio Bolsonaro. Flávio Bolsonaro too. Eduardo Bolsonaro and Flávio Bolsonaro spoke out. Eduardo Bolsonaro, he voted to release Chiquinho Brazão, and Flávio Bolsonaro also spoke out in favor of releasing Chiquinho Brazão. But he didn't get the majority of the votes. That's why he wasn't released at the time. But it's important for us to remember that the Bolsonaro family always votes in favor of criminals. They claim to focus on guns, violence, and believe only dead criminals are good. But when it's time for them to actually vote for the state to actually punish criminals, they do everything they can to get the criminal out of jail. To me, it's because they're criminals too. There's no other justification. Do you understand, my dear? So that's the situation. Can Ciro Nogueira be arrested, Andrea Gonçalves? Yes, he can. If it's in the act only for a non-bailable crime. If it's by court order, any crime. A politician can be arrested if a court order is issued. But to keep him in custody, it has to be something really solid. Otherwise, the Senate overturns the arrest. That's why he wasn't arrested. They even asked me, Andrea Gonçalves, why wasn't he arrested right away? I couldn't explain all this in the comments, so I'm explaining it live now. It's because it really has to be something that has a very strong body of evidence. Otherwise, the Senate itself will overturn his arrest. That would look bad, right? Then it looks like the Supreme Court doesn't have any power, and it ends up creating a sense that the judiciary has been discredited, and that's not good. That's why, all right? I'm asking you to like the live stream, comment, and share. It's really important. I'll say it again. Join the group here. Look, on the WhatsApp channel, whenever there's a live stream, whenever I'm going to come on and explain something, I'll send you the link. So you don't miss anything. Because there are people who are more lost than a blind man in a shootout. And here, I don't want anyone lost. I want everyone to know what's going on here. Okay? Like the live stream, comment, and share. Kisses, you handsome and beautiful people. I'll be back soon. Stay tuned, okay?